No law, no witnesses, just a promise of revenge carried across oceans, ice, and time. The Cumberland Gap had seen many men pass through its ancient stone corridors, but few had carried the weight that Samuel Hardin bore on his shoulders that autumn morning in 1801. At 32 years old, his face already carried the deep-cut lines of Appalachian hardship, the kind that came from fighting rocky soil, harsh winters, and harder men. Samuel stood at the edge of his small tobacco field in eastern Kentucky, watching smoke rise from what had been his neighbor's cabin. The Shawnee raids had been getting worse, but this wasn't Shawnee work. Everyone in the holler knew it, even if they wouldn't say it aloud. The patterns were wrong, the timing too convenient, and the tracks leading away from the burned homesteads told a story that made Samuel's blood run cold. His younger brother, Thomas, approached from the tree line, his rifle cradled in his arms like a sleeping child. At 26, Thomas still had the rangy build of youth, but his eyes had aged beyond his years. 3 tours fighting with the Kentucky militia had done that to him. Found 6 more sets of tracks leading toward Crane's trading post, Thomas said quietly, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. Iron horseshoes, not unshod ponies. Samuel nodded slowly, his jaw working. Ezekiel Crane. The name hung in the air between them like a curse. Ezekiel Crane had come to Kentucky 5 years earlier from somewhere back east. Virginia, he claimed, though his accent suggested farther north. He'd set up a trading post at the junction where the Wilderness Road met the Cumberland River, and he'd grown rich with suspicious speed. Furs flowed through his post in quantities that seemed impossible for the number of trappers in the region. Whiskey flowed out just as freely, finding its way into both settler and Indian camps. But it was the guns that troubled Samuel most. New British muskets, French pistols, even Spanish carbines. Weapons that should never have made it this far into Kentucky country. Weapons that started showing up in raids against isolated farmsteads. Pa would tell us to let it go, Thomas said, though his tone suggested he knew better than to believe it. Would say it ain't our fight. Samuel turned to his brother, and in his eyes Thomas saw something that made him straighten. It was the same look their father had worn at King's Mountain, the same look that had sent him charging into British lines with nothing but a hunting rifle and pure Scots-Irish fury. Pa's been dead 3 years, Samuel said, and those tracks we found last month, the ones leading away from his cabin after the fire, they said was an accident. They led to Crane's post, too. I checked. The words settled between them like stones dropped in still water. Their father, old James Hardin, had died in a cabin fire the previous winter. The magistrate had ruled it an accident. A knocked-over lantern, probably, caused by too much corn whiskey. But Samuel had found things that didn't fit. His father's rifle missing, his purse of silver coins gone, and boot prints in the snow that were too large for the old man's feet. You sure about this? Thomas asked, though they both knew he'd already made his choice. Checked the county records last week, Samuel replied. Crane's been buying up burned-out properties for pennies. Got title to 18 homesteads in the last 2 years, Pa's land included. Thomas whistled low. Land speculation through murder and arson, that's a hanging offense. If we could prove it in court, Samuel said bitterly. But Crane's got the magistrate in his pocket. Judge Morrison owes him money, and half the county officials buy their whiskey from his post. we'd be arrested before we finished testifying. So what do you propose? Samuel walked to the edge of his porch and sat down heavily. I've been hearing stories about Alaska. Thomas blinked in surprise. The Russian territory, that's halfway across the world. More than halfway. But I've been talking to a trapper named John Peterson. He came through last month, stayed the night, said he'd spent 5 years up there working for the Russian-American company. Said a man could make more money in 1 season trapping sea otter than in 10 years farming Kentucky dirt. Even if that's true, he also said Ezekiel Crane's brother operates a trading post up there. Nathaniel Crane runs a brutal operation, cheats the natives, waters down his rum, and has men killed when they cross him. Peterson said everyone up there hates him but can't touch him because he's got protection from the Russian authorities. Understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes. You want to go up there and kill him? I want to destroy him, Samuel corrected. Same way Ezekiel destroyed Bar. Take everything he's built, burn it down, leave him with nothing. Then, when he's broken and knows it was us, finish it. And what about Ezekiel? Samuel's smile was cold. When Nathaniel's empire collapses, it'll shake loose whatever evidence he's been hiding. And when we come back, we'll have enough money from trapping to hire lawyers who can't be bought. We'll ruin him proper. Thomas considered this, working it through. It was ambitious, probably crazy, and would take at least 2 years of their lives. But the alternative was watching Crane continue to profit from murder while their father's death went unavenged. Alaska, Thomas said finally. Never thought I'd go farther than the Mississippi. We leave in spring, Samuel said. Soon as the pass is clear, we go west to St. Louis, then up the Missouri to the mountains, across to the Pacific, and north to Russian America. Peterson said the Russian-American company sometimes hires American trappers. We'll get inside Nathaniel's operation, learn its weaknesses, then strike. That's one hell of a long way to go for revenge. Samuel stood and looked out over the Kaw mountains that had shaped their family for 3 generations. Barr used to say the Hardins came from Scotland, where they fought clan feuds that lasted centuries. He said revenge wasn't something you did in a day. It was something you planned, prepared for, and executed with patience. We've got Scots blood in us, Tommy. Time we remembered what that means. They left Kentucky on April 15th, 1809, with 2 pack horses, their rifles, and everything they owned worth carrying. Samuel had sold his land to a cousin for enough to fund the journey, and Thomas had liquidated his savings. Between them, they had about $300 in silver coins, a fortune by frontier standards, but barely enough for what lay ahead. The journey to St. Louis took 3 weeks through spring mud and swollen rivers. The city was booming, growing fat on the fur trade and westward expansion. The streets teemed with French traders, Spanish merchants, Indian delegations, and Americans from every state in the Union. It was here that Samuel and Thomas got their first real taste of the scope of the fur trade. At Chouteau's trading house, they met a grizzled French-Canadian named Baptiste Moreau, who'd spent 20 years in the far west. Over whiskey that actually tasted like whiskey instead of the turpentine they sold in Kentucky, Baptiste filled them in on what lay ahead. Alaska, hey? Baptiste said, his weathered face creasing with interest. Russian America. I spent 2 seasons up there in '04 and '05. Hard country. Beautiful but hard. The Russians, they mostly stay on Kodiak Island and around Sitka. The real money's in sea otter pelts. They're worth their weight in silver in Canton, but the hunting's getting harder as the animals get scarce. We heard about a trader named Nathaniel Crane, Samuel said carefully. Know anything about him? Baptiste's expression darkened. Crane. Oui, I know him. He runs a post on the Kenai Peninsula, services the independent trappers who don't want to work directly for the Russian-American company. He's a cheat and a murderer, but he's smart. Always stays just inside the law, or pays off those who enforce it. How do we get there? Thomas asked. You go west. Find a brigade heading to the Rockies. Shouldn't be hard. They leave all the time. Cross the mountains. Make your way to the Columbia River. Follow it to the Pacific. Then you either walk north along the coast, which is suicide, or you find a ship willing to take you to Russian territory. Most ships going that way are Russian or British. Sometimes an American merchantman will go up looking to trade. How long? Samuel asked. Baptiste shrugged. If everything goes perfect, 8 months, more likely a year. If you run into trouble, you might never make it at all. The Blackfeet will kill you for your horses. The Grizzlies will kill you for fun. The mountains will kill you just because they're there. And if you make it through all that, the sea will try to finish the job. Samuel and Thomas exchanged glances. Neither man flinched. We'll manage, Samuel said. Baptiste studied them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you might. You've got that look about you. I've seen it before in men who won't quit no matter what. But let me give you some advice. When you get up there, don't go after Crane directly. The Russians protect their traders, even the crooked ones. You need to undermine him slowly, carefully. Make him bleed money, turn his partners against him, destroy his reputation. Then, when he's weak, you strike. That's the plan, Samuel confirmed. Baptiste smiled. Then you might actually pull this off. Here. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. This is a letter of introduction to a man in Sitka named Ivan Kuskov. He's second in command of the Russian-American company. He hates Crane as much as anyone. Crane operates just outside their territory, siphons off their best trappers, and undercuts their prices. If you can present yourself as men who can solve their Crane problem, Kuskov might help you. Samuel took the letter, feeling its weight. This changed things. This gave them an entry point. They spent 2 more weeks in St. Louis, gathering supplies and information. They bought bitter rifles, powder and shot, steel traps, trade goods, and cold weather gear. They talked to every trapper, trader, and Indian agent they could find, building a mental map of the territory ahead. Finally, on May 10th, they joined a fur brigade of 40 men heading up the Missouri River under the leadership of a hard-bitten Virginian named Coulter. Not the famous John Coulter, but a distant cousin who'd learned the trade from him. The brigade was a mixed group. French Canadians, Kentuckians like themselves, a few Delaware and Shawnee scouts, and even a Spanish aristocrat from Santa Fe seeking adventure. The journey up the Missouri was brutal. They poled and pulled their boats against the current, fighting the spring floods. Mosquitoes swarmed in biblical numbers. The heat was oppressive, and the occasional thunderstorm turned the river into a roiling brown monster that threatened to capsize them hourly. But Samuel and Thomas had grown up hard, and they adapted. They learned the river's moods, the methods of making camp in hostile territory, the art of reading the land for signs of danger. By the time they reached the Mandan villages in late June, they were no longer Kentucky farm boys. They were becoming mountain men. At the Mandan villages, the brigade split up. Most men would spend the summer trading with the tribes, then return to St. Louis with the fall furs. But Samuel and Thomas had other plans. They joined a smaller group of 8 men, led by a Scotsman named Duncan MacLeod, who was heading to the Rocky Mountains to trap beaver. MacLeod was a fascinating character, educated, well-spoken, but absolutely lethal in the wilderness. He'd left Scotland after the failed Jacobite. Risings left his family impoverished, and he'd found new life in the American wilderness. When he learned the Hardin brothers were also of Scots descent and were bound for Alaska, he took them under his wing. Alaska's where the real fortunes are being made, MacLeod told them around a campfire one night as they crossed the Great Plains. Sea otter pelts fetch $200 each in Canton. A good hunter can take 50 in a season. That's $10,000, boys. That's enough money to buy a plantation in Kentucky or a shipping business in Boston. What's the catch? Thomas asked. The catch is staying alive, MacLeod replied. The sea otter hunt is dangerous. You're in kayaks in water that'll kill you in minutes if you capsize. The weather can turn on you in an instant. The Russians work their hunters to death, literally. The native Aleuts are virtual slaves to the Russian-American company. They're forced to hunt, and if they don't meet their quotas, their families starve. Sounds like we'll fit right in, Samuel said darkly. We're good at dealing with tyrants. MacLeod gave him a sharp look. This isn't about fighting, lad. Not at first. You're going into Russian territory. The Tsar's authority extends there, backed up by Russian guns and Russian ships. You'll need to be smart, patient, and cunning. Can you do that? We can, Samuel assured him. The crossing of the Rockies took 6 weeks and tested every ounce of their strength. They traversed passes where the snow never melted, where the altitude made breathing hard and thinking harder. They watched one man fall to his death when a trail crumbled beneath him. They fought off a grizzly that killed 2 of their horses. They nearly starved when game became scarce, but they made it. In late August, they descended the western slope of the mountains and entered a landscape unlike anything they'd ever seen. Instead of the hardwood forests of Kentucky or the pine woods of the mountains, they found themselves in valleys filled with massive trees: Douglas fir, Sitka spruce, western red cedar, trees so large that 5 men could encircle their trunks with joined hands. They followed rivers downstream toward the Pacific, supplementing their dwindling supplies by trading with the native tribes they encountered: the Nez Perce, the Salish, the Chinook. Each nation had its own customs, its own ways of dealing with strangers. Samuel and Thomas learned to navigate these cultural differences, aided by MacLeod's experience and their own frontier instincts. By September, they reached the Columbia River, that mighty waterway that flows into the Pacific. Here, MacLeod's party would turn south, heading to wintering grounds in the interior. But the Hardin brothers would continue west to the ocean. "You're sure about this?" MacLeod asked them on the morning they parted ways. "You could winter with us, trap beaver, make good money, head north in the spring when traveling's easier." Samuel shook his head. We've come this far. We're not stopping now. MacLeod studied them, then nodded. I admire your determination, lads. Here. He handed Samuel a fine Scottish dirk, its handle wrapped in leather. This belonged to my grandfather. He carried it at Culloden. You'll need a good blade where you're going. Samuel accepted the gift with solemnity. We'll not forget this. See that you don't die before you can return it, MacLeod said with a slight smile. Now go. The trading posts at Astoria are another week downstream. If you're lucky, you'll find a ship heading north before winter sets in. The Hardin brothers reached Astoria in mid-September. The American trading post at the mouth of the Columbia was a rough collection of log buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade, but to men who'd been in the wilderness for 5 months, it looked like civilization. The post was run by the Pacific Fur Company, John Jacob Astor's attempt to break into the northwestern fur trade. The factor, a sharp-eyed New Yorker named Mackenzie, looked the brothers over with the practiced gaze of a man who'd seen every type of fortune-seeker the frontier produced. Alaska, Mackenzie said when they explained their destination. You're either very brave or very stupid, probably both. The Russians don't like American traders up there, and they've got the guns to enforce their preferences. We're not traders, Samuel said. We're hunters. We've got a letter of introduction to Ivan Kuskov in Sitka. He showed Baptiste's letter. Mackenzie's eyebrows rose. Well, that changes things. Kuskov's a reasonable man from what I hear. Smarter than most Russians. You might actually survive. He paused. There's a British ship in harbor, the HMS Discovery. They're heading to Sitka in 3 days to deliver supplies to the Russian governor. Captain's a man named Thompson. He might take passengers if the price is right. The price turned out to be $50 each, which took a painful bite out of their funds. But Captain Thompson was true to his word. On September 18, 1809, the Discovery set sail from Astoria with a northwest wind filling her canvas. The voyage north was Samuel and Thomas's first experience with the open ocean, and it was harrowing. The Pacific lived up to its name for the first 2 days, but then a storm hit that made every river crossing they'd endured seem tame by comparison. For 3 days, the ship was tossed like a leaf in a mill race. The brothers, along with half the crew, were violently seasick. But the storm passed, and they sailed on. The coastline they passed was spectacular. Jagged cliffs, dense forests running down to the water's edge, and mountains that seemed to rise straight out of the sea. They saw whales breaching, sea lions barking from rocky outcrops, and thousands of seabirds wheeling in the sky. Captain Thompson, a veteran of 20 years in Pacific waters, proved to be a valuable source of information about Russian America. The Russians control a strip of coastline from Kodiak Island up past Sitka, he explained one evening as they sat in his cabin. But their control is tenuous. They've got maybe 700 Russians in the entire territory, supplemented by a few thousand Aleuts and other natives they've pressed into service. The real power is the Russian-American Company. They've got a monopoly on the fur trade, granted by the Tsar himself. What about independent traders? Samuel asked. Thompson snorted. The Russians tolerate a few, mostly in areas they can't fully control, but they'll crush anyone who threatens their monopoly. Your man Crane operates on the Kenai Peninsula, which is technically Russian territory, but far enough from Sitka that the company can't watch him constantly. He survived by being useful. He supplies furs to the company at good prices, and he keeps other independent traders away through intimidation. How does he intimidate people? Thomas asked. Violence, mostly. He's got a crew of about 20 men, Americans, British, Aleuts, even a few Russians who've gone rogue. They're thugs and killers, everyone. Crane's post is like a fortress. Stockade walls, cannon, the works. He runs it like his own little kingdom. Samuel and Thomas absorbed this information, adding it to their growing mental picture of their enemy. They reached Sitka on October 3rd, sailing into a harbor that took their breath away. The town, really just a large settlement, sat on the western shore of Baranov Island, backed by towering mountains. The Russian fort dominated the waterfront, its walls bristling with cannon. Behind it rose the distinctive onion dome of an Orthodox church. Sitka in 1809 was a rough place, still recovering from the Tlingit uprising of 1802 that had destroyed the original settlement. The Russians had recaptured it in 1804, and now they ruled with an iron fist. The population was perhaps 500 souls, Russian administrators and soldiers, Aleut hunters, and a smattering of Tlingit who'd made peace with the occupiers. Captain Thompson introduced the Hardin brothers to Ivan Kuskov, who received them in his office in the Russian fort. Kuskov was a solidly built man in his 40s, with intelligent eyes and a neat beard. He spoke surprisingly good English, learned during years of dealing with American sea captains. He read Baptiste's letter carefully, then studied the brothers with interest. "So," he said in his accented English, "you are Kentucky men who wish to hunt sea otter. Why should I believe this is your true purpose?" Samuel had prepared for this question. "Because we could make more money trapping beaver in the Rockies with less risk and less travel. We came here for a reason beyond money." "And that reason is?" Nathaniel Crane. Kuskov's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Go on." Samuel laid out the story, carefully edited, but truthful in its essentials. Their father's death, Ezekiel Crane's crimes in Kentucky, the connection between the two Crane brothers, their plan to destroy Nathaniel's operation and gather evidence of his crimes. When Samuel finished, Kuskov was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and poured 3 glasses of vodka from a bottle on his desk. He handed one to each brother, then raised his own. "To revenge," he said simply. "Russians understand this motivation. It is honest." They drank. The vodka burned like liquid fire. "I will tell you about Nathaniel Crane," Kuskov said, settling back into his chair. "He has been a problem for the Russian-American company for 5 years. He operates just within the boundaries of acceptable behavior. He pays his fees to the Tsar's representative. He does not openly challenge our authority, but he corrupts our hunters, selling them cheap vodka and expensive supplies. He smuggles furs to American and British ships, avoiding our export fees, and he is brutal to the natives in his area, which creates unrest that spreads." "Why not arrest him?" Thomas asked. "Evidence," Kuskov said flatly. "And politics. Crane has friends in St. Petersburg. He bribes the right officials. To move against him, I would need proof of crimes so serious that his protectors could not save him. I would need evidence of murder, of cheating the Tsar's treasury, of inciting natives to rebellion." "We can get you that evidence," Samuel said. "Perhaps you can," Kuskov agreed. Here is what I propose. I will hire you as independent hunters working under contract to the Russian-American company. This gives you legal status to operate in Russian territory. You will be assigned to hunt sea otter in the waters around the Kenai Peninsula, which is Crane's territory. While there, you will investigate his operations. Any evidence you gather will be given to me. In return, you keep 70% of the value of the furs you bring in, a generous rate. And when we have enough evidence, Samuel asked, then we will decide together how best to proceed. I am a practical man, Mr. Harden. I care about results, not methods. If Crane's operation is destroyed and he is ruined, I will not ask too many questions about how it happened. But you must be clever. Crane is dangerous, and he has survived many enemies. They shook hands on the deal, a compact between men who understood that sometimes justice required working outside the law. Kuskov provided them with supplies, 2 Aleut hunters to teach them the skills of sea otter hunting, and a letter of introduction that would allow them to move freely in Russian territory. He also gave them something more valuable: information. Crane has a weakness, Kuskov said as they prepared to leave. His accountant, a man named Pyotr Volkov, Russian from a merchant family in Irkutsk. Crane trusts him because he's good with numbers and has kept the books clean for inspection. But Volkov drinks, and when he drinks, he talks. Find a way to befriend him, and you may learn much. The journey from Sitka to the Kenai Peninsula took 2 weeks aboard a Russian supply ship. The brothers used the time to learn from their Aleut guides, 2 men named Paul and Mikhail, who'd been given Christian names by Russian missionaries. Sea otter hunting, they learned, was an art form. The otters were intelligent and wary, with keen senses. Hunters paddled kayaks in flotillas, surrounding the otters and preventing them from reaching the kelp beds where they could hide. The killing itself was done with spears or clubs, requiring precise timing and skill. Otter is smart, Paul explained in his limited English, smarter than seal, smarter than walrus. He remember hunters, he learn, each season harder to hunt. Why does Crane's operation do well when everyone else struggles? Samuel asked. Paul and Mikhail exchanged dark glances. Finally, Mikhail spoke. Crane makes hunters take risks, go in bad weather, hunt in dangerous waters. Many men die. He not care, just send more hunters. This was the first confirmation of what Samuel had suspected. Nathaniel Crane was as ruthless as his brother, willing to sacrifice men's lives for profit. They reached Crane's post on November 1st. It was situated on a protected bay on the eastern shore of the Kenai Peninsula, surrounded by towering mountains and dense forest. The post itself matched Captain Thompson's description: a wooden stockade 15 feet high, with a gatehouse and corner bastions mounting small cannon. Inside the stockade, they could see several buildings: a main trading house, storage sheds, barracks, and what looked like a workshop. A flag flew over the post, not Russian or American, but a personal banner bearing Crane's initials. They announced themselves at the gate, presenting Kuskov's letter of introduction. After a tense wait, they were admitted into the compound. Nathaniel Crane proved to be a different physical type from what they'd expected. Where Ezekiel had been lean and sharp-featured, Samuel remembered him well. Nathaniel was broad and powerful, with a thick beard and cold blue eyes that assessed visitors like a predator sizing up prey. He was perhaps 40 years old, dressed in a mix of Russian and American clothing that somehow emphasized his independence from both nations. "Kentucky men," Crane said, reading Kuskov's letter with obvious displeasure. "Come all this way to hunt sea otter. Seems like a lot of trouble for something you could do closer to home." "Beaver prices are down," Samuel said, sticking to their cover story. "Sea otter prices are up. We go where the money is." Crane studied them for a long moment. "You look like fighting men, not trappers. What did you do before this?" "Farming," Thomas said. "Some militia work during the Indian troubles. Nothing special." "Militia work?" Crane's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Well, this isn't Kentucky. Different rules out here. You work hard, follow my instructions, and we'll get along fine. You cause trouble, and the ocean's very deep. Understood?" "Understood," Samuel said evenly. Crane had them assigned to a bunkhouse with 8 other hunters, a mix of Americans, British, and Aleots. The conditions were rough but not unbearable. The food was adequate, the sleeping arrangements tolerable. But the atmosphere was tense. Men spoke in low voices and watched each other warily. That first night, Samuel and Thomas met some of their fellow hunters. A former sailor from Boston named Jeremiah Black proved talkative after a few drinks. "You picked a hard boss," Jeremiah told them quietly. "Crane pushes harder than the Russians ever did. We hunt in weather that should keep us ashore. Lost 3 men last month when a storm came up sudden. Crane didn't even have a funeral, just divided up their gear and sent the next crew out." "Doesn't anyone complain?" Thomas asked. "To who?" "We're independent contractors, not company men. We signed on knowing the risks, and Crane pays well, better than anyone else. That's why men keep coming, even though they know what they're getting into." "What about the Russians? Don't they care?" Jeremiah shrugged. "Crane pays his fees, keeps his paperwork clean. Far as the officials in Sitka know, this is a model operation. They've got no idea what really happens here." Over the following weeks, Samuel and Thomas established themselves as competent hunters. The work was brutally hard and dangerous, but their Kentucky toughness served them well. They learned to handle the kayaks, to read the weather, to work as part of a hunting flotilla. They also learned to watch and listen. They observed the operation carefully, noting how supplies moved in and out, how Crane kept his accounts, who he trusted and who he didn't. They began to see the shape of his empire and its vulnerabilities. Crane ran 3 operations from his post. The legitimate one was sea otter, hunting under contract to the Russian-American company. But he also ran 2 illegal operations. He was smuggling furs to American and British ships that anchored in hidden coves along the coast, and he was selling watered-down vodka to Russian hunters from company operations, undermining their efficiency and loyalty. The key to all of this was Pyotr Volkov, the accountant. Samuel managed to befriend him in the post's small tavern, a rough establishment where the hunters drank after expeditions. Volkov was a sad figure, a cultured man trapped in brutal circumstances, drinking to forget his mistakes. He'd come to Russian America hoping to make his fortune, but had fallen into debt to Crane. Now he kept Crane's books, maintaining 2 sets, one for the Russian authorities and one that recorded the actual numbers. It took weeks to gain Volkov's trust, but Samuel had patience. He shared his Kentucky whiskey, better than anything available locally. listened to Volkov's complaints, and gradually became someone the accountant could confide in. One night in mid-December, Volkov got very drunk and started talking. "I'm damned," he said morosely, "damned for what I do for him, the lies I write, the numbers I falsify. Men die because of what I enable." "Then stop enabling it," Samuel said carefully. Volkov laughed bitterly. "And then what?" "He'd kill me, or turn me over to the Russian authorities, and I'd spend the rest of my life in a Siberian prison. I'm trapped, my friend, trapped by my own weakness." "What if there was a way out?" Samuel asked. "What if someone could protect you from Crane and the Russians both?" Volkov looked at him with sudden sharp intelligence, the drunk mask falling away. "Who are you really, Kentucky man? You're no simple hunter." Samuel made a decision. "My name is Samuel Hardin. My brother and I came here to destroy Nathaniel Crane. His brother murdered our father in Kentucky. We're going to make both of them pay." Volkov stared at him for a long moment, then began to laugh. A genuine laugh this time, not bitter. "Revenge, of course. I should have seen it. You have that look about you, that patience that comes from long-planned vengeance." He leaned forward. "I can help you. God knows I want to, but I need assurances." "What kind of assurances?" "Protection from the Russians. A new identity, perhaps. Passage to somewhere Crane's reach cannot extend." "I can get you that," Samuel promised. "Ivan Kuskov in Sitka wants Crane destroyed. Help us bring him down, and Kuskov will protect you." "Kuskov?" Volkov mused. "Yes, he would be glad to see Crane fall." "Very well. What do you need?" "Everything. The real books, evidence of the smuggling, the illegal vodka sales, everything." "But we also need something more. We need to know about his operation in Kentucky. Does he correspond with his brother?" "Oh yes," Volkov said. "Every ship that goes south carries letters. I've read some of them. Crane is careless with papers sometimes. The brothers are partners, you see. Ezekiel sends furs and information about the Indian troubles in Kentucky. Nathaniel sends money and goods. They're building something together, some kind of empire that spans the continent." This was more than Samuel had hoped for. "Can you get me copies of those letters?" "I can do better than that. I can get you the originals. Crane keeps them in a locked box in his office. I know where he hides the key." They spent the rest of December planning carefully. Volkov would steal the evidence piece by piece, copy in documents when he could, and take in originals when he dared. Samuel and Thomas would continue hunting, maintaining their cover while building a case against Crane. But they also began planning the physical destruction of Crane's operation, because Samuel had decided that evidence alone wasn't enough. He wanted to do to Nathaniel what Ezekiel had done to their father, burn it all down. January 1010 brought terrible storms to the Kenai Peninsula. The hunting crews stayed ashore, huddled in the bunkhouses while the wind howled and snow piled up around the stockade. It was during this time that Samuel and Thomas finalized their plans with Volkov. The accountant had managed to steal an impressive collection of evidence, ledgers showing the true profits from smuggling, correspondence with ship captains about illegal fur sales, and most damning, letters between Nathaniel and Ezekiel Crane that laid out their entire operation. Reading those letters, Samuel felt his rage crystallize into cold purpose. Ezekiel's letters casually mentioned clearing homesteaders from valuable land, spoke of bribing officials and eliminating troublesome witnesses. One letter specifically mentioned their father, noting that the old man Hardin was becoming a problem but has been handled. Handled. Their father reduced to a problem that had been handled. When? Thomas asked simply, reading the same letter over Samuel's shoulder. Soon, Samuel replied. But we do this right. We send the evidence to Kuskov first, make sure it gets out even if we don't. Then we hit Crane when he's most vulnerable,